About 18 and a half years ago, when our youngest child, our son Gabriel, was 9 and a half, he came up to me and he said, Mom, would you watch a movie with me? And I said, yeah, sure, I'll watch a movie with you. And I'm thinking this was on a Friday, and I don't know where Phil or Crystal or Isaac were. I can't remember that, but that was something we did do on Friday evenings as a family, was find something that the kids could agree on, and then we would watch a movie. So I said, just a minute, let me get my stuff ready, and then we'll be good to go. And he said, no, Mom, I don't want you to get your stuff. And I said, I can't do my stuff. And he goes, no, I just want you to watch a movie with me. Well, when we would watch movies, the first thing we'd rearrange the furniture, and then I would vacuum the carpet really good, because I was going to fold laundry on the floor. So that was part of my stuff, was a laundry basket of 2 or 3 loads of laundry, always the whites, the socks, the towels. And then I'd have some coupons out of Sunday's paper I was going to clip. And I might even have the bank statement and our checkbook, and I was going to reconcile our bank statement with our ledger. And this is what I was going to do while I was watching the movie. But Gabriel didn't want me to do all that. So I said, okay, fine. Let me finish what I'm doing here, then I'll be ready. So I come into the family room, and he has already rearranged the furniture. We used to do childcare in that room. And so in the evenings or on the weekends, if we were going to watch TV, we rotated the love seat around to face the TV, and we would move the recliner. And our furniture was on moving men, so one person could do it. You know what those are? Those are little frisbees, those little discs that you put underneath, and shows a commercial where an old woman can move a china hutch with her finger. And anyway, so he already had the living room set up, or the family room. He had a TV tray. He had snacks. We had popcorn and chocolate, and a couple blankets. And so I walk in, I go, okay, Gabe. I go, what movie are we going to watch? And he said, You've Got Mail. Now, that just happened to be my favorite movie. And it had been released out on VHS. That tells you how old this story is. No DVDs. And he knew it was my favorite movie. And when we had purchased it, we had watched it as a family. And I had probably watched it with Phil a second or third time. But clearly, this was not Gabriel's favorite movie. And if he was choosing a movie to watch with his dad or his brother, it would not be You've Got Mail.
Amen.
So we had such a good time. We sat there. I was not distracted. I was watching the movie. We were talking. We were visiting. We were enjoying each other's company. And then later that evening, probably before I was going to bed, I was thinking, am I such a lousy mother that my son had to choose his mother's favorite movie just to get her to stop what she was doing and to do something with him? And so I was allowing Satan to just make me feel horrible. And then I had the thought, what a precious memory. I am never going to forget the night that Gabriel and I watched You've Got Mail. And we know of the stories in the Bible, and they say this story will always be told. And I compare it to that, thinking, I didn't need to write this down in his baby book. I will always, always remember that. It's such a precious memory. And then once I got past that, I thought, this is a wonderful example of how God pursues us. He knows exactly what we like. He knows who we are. He just wants our undivided attention. He wants all of us. And he will set the scene. He'll set the table. He'll make the place ready. And all we have to do is come and sit with him and have that sweet time of fellowship with him. So when Pastor Sean was introducing the series, God with Us, 2 weeks ago in his message, he said, God desires to be with us more than we could possibly desire to be with him. And the moment, I scribbled that down as fast as I could, and the moment he said that, my mind went back those 18 years to when Gabriel and I watched that movie together.
That is a wonderful story about how you and Gabe had a night that he had prepared for you. And it's a great example of what God does for us. He goes before us and he prepares the way for us. He does that so that he can be with us and we can be with him. So as you were giving that story, I was thinking of two things. The first thing I was thinking of was Pastor Grady last week in his sermon, and about how God is walking with him through cancer. And one of the scriptures that he used for that was Psalms 23. And he started reading that. The Lord is my shepherd, I shall not want. And then he read some more. And it talks about, though we walk through the valleys of the shadow of death, I will fear no evil, for he is with me. His rod and his staff, they comfort me. And you have prepared a table before me in the presence of my enemies. My cup runs over. Surely goodness and mercy will follow me all the days of my life. And I will dwell in the house of the Lord forever. And if you were here last week, then you've seen the table that he had set up here. And he talked about what it means to have a table set and prepared. And in that case, in the presence of his enemies. What a great picture of God being with us. The second picture that I have in my head comes from the book of Exodus, where God is bringing the children of Israel out of Egypt. I want to read something to you. It's coming from Exodus, the 6th chapter, beginning with the 6th verse, and I'm reading this out of the Living Bible. He says, "Therefore, tell the descendants of Israel that I will use my mighty power and perform great miracles to deliver them from slavery and make them free. And I will accept them as my people, and I will be their God. And they shall know that I am Jehovah their God, who has rescued them from the Egyptians. And I will bring them into the land that I promised to give to Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, and it shall belong to my people." One of the reasons why God brought the children of Israel out of Egypt, one of the reasons, is because he wanted to be their God, their only God, and because he wanted them to be his family. He wanted them to be his family. And so I think about that, how God delivered them. And he did that in a very physical way. His presence was with them that whole time. When he brought them up out of Egypt, he became for them a pillar of cloud by day and a pillar of fire by night. And his presence went with them that whole journey, the pillar of cloud and the pillar of fire. It protected them. The pillar of cloud protected them in a very real way, a physical way, from the burning sun in the hot desert. It shaded them. And then at night, the pillar of fire, in a very real way, a very needful way, the pillar of fire at night was warmth to them in the cold desert. God was very present with them, and he was very real. He also did that through miraculous miracles. Oh my goodness. When they got thirsty, the first time they got thirsty, and they ran out of water, and they were close to some water, and that water was bitter. And so God told Moses, cut a tree down and put it in there. And that's what he did, and that water became sweet. He met a very real need. They ran out of water a second time. And this time God led them to a very specific mountain. And he said, there'll be a rock there. I want you to strike the rock, and enough water will come out to fill, for everybody to drink and to take care of them. And so that's what he did. And when he hit that rock, water gushed out. And it was enough probably to take care of someplace between 2 and 4 million people. He met needs in a very real way. God was with them. God was present with them every step of the way.
Last week during Pastor Grady's message, I don't know if he talked about Exodus or not, but that's where my mind went. But you know how one thought leads to another thought. You kind of go on a little pig trail. And, which, by the way, I was really blessed by your message. I took lots of notes. I was thinking about what Phil was saying about how God, was the ultimate provider. Whatever they needed, whenever they needed it, he was there to provide it for them. And as a parent or maybe as someone in business where you are over people and you care about your people and you're doing everything you can for them and they're just not getting it, at some point, I would think, what more can I do? I had that thought during your sermon, what more can I do? And it was like a ticker tape. It was like the next thought that was in my mind, was God saying, I'll send my son. And so we know that was not God's plan B. We know that was always his plan from the beginning of time. When the time was right, Jesus would be born. In Isaiah, the 7th chapter, the 14th verse, we have a prophetic word. Therefore the Lord himself shall give you a sign. Behold, the young woman who is unmarried and a virgin shall conceive and bear a son, and shall call his name Emmanuel. Then in chapter 9, verse 6, we have, for to us a child is born, to us a son is given, and the government shall be upon his shoulder, and his name shall be called Wonderful Counselor, Almighty God, Everlasting Father, Prince of Peace. And so in the New Testament we have this prophecy come to fulfillment with the birth of Jesus. And what we have learned is that you cannot separate God from peace. God is peace. And if you are walking in the presence of God, if you are enjoying him, you will have peace.
1993, 1994. At that time, I was working in the Department of Corrections. And in 1993, the state of Nebraska began to take steps to require people who were doing counseling, who were doing therapy, who were mental health counselors. They started taking the steps to require that those people would be licensed. Part of the licensing process involved having a master's degree from an accredited school. There were some other steps, but that was the big one. Having an accredited master's degree from a school. And so at that time, I was working as a mental health counselor in one of our prisons here in town. And when our boss came home and told us that, our boss also said that if you don't have that, then you're not going to be able to work here. And so I came home, and Terri and I talked about it, and we prayed about it, and we just decided for everything that we were doing at that time that this was not the time for me to go back to school and get a master's degree. And so we both had peace about that. And so a little bit later, our boss came and talked with us again and said, if you don't have a master's degree and you are able to, or you decide to go back to school, we will give you time to go back to school and to become licensed. And so then I went back and I talked with Terri, and I said, honey, they kind of changed things a little bit. And they said, now if we just have, we have X amount of time to go back to school and get a master's degree. And we talked about it some more, and we decided that our original decision was what we wanted to stay with, that I wouldn't continue on and look for a master's degree program. Now, that decision was really not based on money or a lack of money. It wasn't based on that. I talked to my folks, and I think that they were willing to do something to help with that if I had decided to go back. It was based on, we just really believed in our hearts that God was with us, that we were doing the things that He wanted us to do, and the evidence of that for us was that we had peace. We had a peace that surpassed all understanding. The boss came back one last time. This was in 1994, and the boss said, because I had the impression that if I didn't go back to school, that I would not have a job anymore. And then the boss said, for those of you who are not going back to school, the state has given the corrections division a window, a 6-year window to go back to school and get your master's degree and then pursue your license. And so I came back again, and Terri and I talked. And again, we had peace with me not going to school. And after that, then our boss said again, so it's kind of like I'm wondering if she's living in our house. And no, she wasn't, and that's a good thing. But our boss said again, you know what, if you are not going to pursue a master's degree, you have 6 years that you can still work with us. And so for the next 6 years, I worked in corrections and as a mental health counselor. And during that time, I was not worried. I was not concerned. I'll just be, and not that I'm a nervous person or a worrier type, but this was God. We just had, both of us, both Terri and I, we just had His peace that passes all understanding. We continued to live the life that we believed that He had given us to live. We continued to spend like we were going to be working in corrections forever. We continued to give the way that He wanted us to give. If something wore out, if something broke, then we replaced it. If there was someplace we wanted to go, then we went. And we did not change or alter our lifestyle. And that for us would be really different. That to me is evidence that there was the peace of God in our lives and in our hearts. In that 6th year, probably in the springtime of that 6th year, our boss said, for those of you that have not continued on in school, your last day is going to be the last Friday in August. And it was about that time that a job opened up in corrections that was similar to what I had done before I became a mental health counselor. And I thought, well, maybe this is God, and maybe this is what He wants me to do now. And so I applied for that, and I got an interview for it, but I did not get the job. And you know what? I didn't feel bad. And I didn't feel like, oh, no, what am I going to do now? I just continued to have the peace of God with me. In the month of May, I had some friends that I had worked with in corrections that were now working at the Lincoln Regional Center. And they gave me a call, and they said, Phil, they're getting ready to post this job, and we believe that this job is just for you. You really need to apply for this job. So I started looking for it in the paper, and I found it in the paper, and I thought, I'm thinking that I would like that. And so I applied for the job, sent in my application and everything, and didn't hear anything throughout the month of June. Probably the last week of June or maybe the first 10 days of July, I got a response from them. And it was a letter that said, if you're still interested, please fill out this supplemental questionnaire and return it to us as soon as possible. So I went, because that meant that I had to type, and I am not a fast typer. And so I did that and sent it in. Terri was gracious enough to help me with all of that, make sure it was worded, and make sure, I don't remember if you typed it or not, but you helped me with the wording. I do remember that. So that's a good thing. And I sent that in, and then I didn't hear anything for another couple of weeks. And I still had peace. And it was probably the second or third week in July, and they called up and they asked me if I wanted an interview. What I would find out later is that they had had over 60 people apply for that job initially. And if you've ever done interviewing, that's something that just makes you shake. That's too many people to interview. And so what they did is they sent out the supplemental questionnaire hoping to weed out a whole bunch of people. Well, they weeded out 30. So that meant that I was one of 30. And then they said that they were going to interview all 30 in 1 week. If you've ever done interviewing before, 30 people in 1 week, that's tiring. That's a lot. And I think that I was in that first batch of interviews. And so if you're interviewing and there is 30 people and you're in the first batch, it's really hard. You know what? God has to go before you. Otherwise, you ain't going to be remembered. Period. That's not their fault. That's too many people to interview. You try and keep track of in your head. And so I did what I normally do. I tried telling a joke during my interview. And the thing that normally happened. Nobody laughed at it. And so I said, okay. So when I didn't hear back, they said, you'll hear something by the end of the week. And when I didn't hear back at the end of the week, the first thing I thought of was the joke. So I said, well, okay, God, they know what they're getting, and they decided they didn't want that. So it was now at the end of July, and then it was the first week of August, and then it was probably at the beginning of the second week of August. And I'm thinking, they said they would notify me at the end of the week, and now it's been 2 weeks past that. So I said, well, I guess, God, they got somebody else. There's another position that had opened up in corrections. And when that opened up, I really didn't like it, but I thought, I suppose it's something that I could do, and if that's what I have to do, God, that's what I'll do. So I called my friend. I had a friend that was working in that institution, and I told them that I'd seen this job, and they said, oh yeah, Phil, you'd be great. And they were really excited about the possibility of us working together again. And I got off the phone, and I just didn't have any peace about pursuing that job. And I said, well, God, this is where I'm hanging my hat. You're either going to find something or you're not. But I'm going to hang my hat with you, and I'm going to stay with you. And I'm thinking it was the same day, maybe an hour later, I got a phone call from them, and they offered me the job that I now have at LRC. God was with me every step of the way. And even more important than him being with me, he was with Terri every step of the way. And I started that job at LRC. I started that job the last Monday of the month, which would have been the Friday. If I'd stayed in corrections, that Friday I would have been terminated. The evidence that God was with me was the peace that passes all understanding.
Well, I definitely am the worrier in the family. And, you know, he remembers all these details. I don't remember any of it. I clearly don't remember worrying. We received a phone call, probably in June, from a good friend from college who was in the ministry, and he would touch base with us every now and again. every 2 or 3 years just to see what was going on. And Phil wasn't home, so I visited with him. And during the course of the conversation, I told him, oh, yeah, the end of August, Phil will no longer be at the regional center, at LRC. And he asked a few questions, and at the end of our conversation, he said, wow, you seem to be okay with all of this. And then we hung up, and it just occurred to me that I am okay with this. And what a miracle that is, that I wasn't worrying and trying to create an Ishmael or something. And we all do it. So 3 or 4 years ago, I don't know when it was, I was looking through some of my mother's things. She's been gone now about 15 years. And I found a little notebook that she had written, like a journal. And she had talked about how a time when God was very, very real to her. And this was not something that Mom did, or not something we knew that she did. And so that was very, very precious to read these reflections she had. And out of that spawned a desire in my heart that when I read the Bible, I wanted to make notes in it, and then I would leave it for a grandchild, and then I'd start the next one. So 3 years ago, I started this endeavor. And this was going to be for our first grandchild, Kate. And so I just was writing in the margins. It's this Bible here. And I just felt like God was revealing stuff to me that I'd never seen before. And there's certain books of the Bible that I've read a lot of times, Genesis, the Gospels, a lot of the books in the New Testament. But I could have read them 50 times, and like, I was reading stuff that I had never seen. It was just, this truth was just jumping off the pages. Almost like, does anybody else even know this? I've never even heard this before. And so it's been real sweet. And I finished, probably June or July of this year, August. And it was time to find another Bible. And I thought, it'd be cool to use one of my mother's Bibles. But she'd be over 100 years old if she was still living. And her Bibles, back then they didn't do study Bibles as often. And so from the top of the page to the bottom of the page, there's text. Not a lot of room. Not too many margins to write stuff in it. So as much as I thought that'd be really special, that wasn't going to work. So, pardon me. So I found another one of our Bibles in the house. And this one is going to be for our grandson, Miles. So I'm not going chronological. I've skipped a few kids, but I just feel like this book is supposed to be for Miles. And then I had the thought, this is embarrassing. But I thought, gosh, am I going to have anything to write in here? When I'm reading, I wrote so much in this Bible. Is there anything new under the sun? And, I know better than that. God's Word is alive and living. And when you open it, He speaks to you is precisely what you need to hear that day. And something I've also done, thanks to counsel from Pastor Robin, is I'm keeping a notebook, like a little journal, and writing. So it's not only in the pages of the Bible, but some of them I'm duplicating from the Bible into a notebook. So then I will have that as my resource, or whatever you want to call it. At the end of the day, when Phil comes home, I can say, oh, honey, this is what God showed me this morning. Or I can have thoughts on Monday, and it's just marvelous. And then on Friday, I go back and read it, and I think, yeah, that's good, but I'm not sure why it stirred my soul so much. But that is God. He speaks to us precisely. And in those mornings, those quiet times with Him, we used to use this expression, or I didn't, but Phil and his friends in college, they used to say, just them and God were having church. And so I feel like in the morning, I'm having church with God, and I am so very, very aware of His presence. And I don't know if it's because I'm more intentional, if it's because I'm thinking of this grandchild as I'm reading. But then I had this revelation just as Phil and I have been preparing for today. And I was thinking of the children of Israel how, they had God in such a tangible way. It's not like Zacchaeus, where he had to climb up in a tree to see Jesus walking down the street. Every man, woman, and child could see that cloud. They could see that pillar. They all had manna in the morning. They all had water to drink. I mean, talk about touching God. But yet and still, they were stubbing their toe on every rock in the wilderness. They could not please this God that loved them. They just weren't getting it figured out. And I thought, it's his daily presence with us. It's the gift of Emmanuel, that when we sit down and we're quiet with him and we know he's there, that's the difference maker that allows us to live this victorious life. I gave the example that in the morning when I walk away from this time, God is still with me. When I get in the car and go to Target and someone cuts me off, I don't give in to the urge to tailgate him, because I am allowing God, that presence that is still with me, I'm allowing him to strengthen me, to empower me. I'm aware of his presence.
So 1980, August 25th, we were living in Tulsa, Oklahoma, and that was the day of our first child, Crystal, being born. We have 3 children, Crystal, who is the oldest, and then Isaac, who's in the middle, and then Gabe, who is our youngest. Sometimes I like to refer to him as our baby because he's taller than I am. And I just kind of like that idea. Anyway, Crystal was born in the evening. And so after everything was said and done, it was late at night when I went home. At that time, if you weren't a patient, you were not supposed to be sleeping in the hospital. And so I wasn't able to stay with Terri. And when I came home and I got out of my car, it was dark. And when I walked around, probably to the back side of the house, and I let myself in, the house was dark. And there was nobody at our house. And because it was so late, I did not call family here in Nebraska, or friends here in Nebraska, or friends that we had in Tulsa, or church family that we had in Tulsa. I did not call anybody because it's too late, and my guess was that they were snoring by that time, and I did not want to wake them up. And I sat down on the couch. I think I had one little light on, and I felt so alone. I felt like I was all by myself. And I wanted to share this information with people, share my joy with somebody, and there was nobody around for me to do that. And so I just got into a funk, and I was depressed. I was feeling sad, and I felt bad for myself, and I just didn't know what to do. Today, I would say that I was looking at everything that I didn't have. What I didn't have is I didn't have family in Tulsa. I wasn't greeted by somebody was, what happened, what happened, what happened? When I got home, all I had was a dark, empty house, had nobody to talk to. I wasn't thinking about what I did have. And what I did have was a God who was with me. He was with us through that whole time of delivery. What I did have was a wife who loved me, who had just made it through her first pregnancy, that had given birth to our first child. What I did have was family and friends, both in Nebraska and in Tulsa, that would be excited to hear the news. What I did have was a healthy child. I wasn't looking at all of that. I was looking at what I didn't have. Oftentimes, God is with us, but because we are not looking at what we do have, and the reason we aren't is because we're focusing on what we don't have. In the book of Luke, the 24th chapter, there's a story about two men, and it was on the Sunday after Jesus was crucified. And during that time, on that Sunday, they were walking to a city that wasn't that far away from Jerusalem. It's called Emmaus. And as they were walking, they were talking about the events that had just taken place. The events that had just taken place is that Jesus, of course, had been crucified before, 3 days before. And the women had gone to finish preparing his body at the tomb for burial. And when they got there, he wasn't there. And people were saying that he had risen again. People were saying that the Roman soldiers had taken and hidden his body. People were saying that he hadn't died to begin with. And these two guys who had been following Jesus, probably for a couple of years at that point, they were just depressed and in a funk. They were confused. They didn't know what to believe. They didn't know who to believe. They were really struggling. And as they were walking on that road, a stranger approached them and looked at them and said, "Why are you guys so sad?" And they said, "You don't know? You haven't heard about all the excitement in Jerusalem?" And they began to talk about Jesus. And they said that he was a man that was acclaimed by the people. They were hoping that he would become king. He was a prophet. He had done tremendous miracles during his time of ministry. And now they had some people from their groups, the women, that had gone and checked the tomb, and it was empty, and they just didn't know what to think. And so that stranger that was with them continued to walk with them and opened up the Old Testament, beginning with Moses, and began to explain the scriptures that talked about how the Messiah would be born, and that the Messiah would have this miraculous life where he was doing miraculous things, and that, yes, he would be crucified, and that he would rise again. And by the time that they reached the city of Emmaus, these guys were in a different mood. They had been transformed and changed by this stranger who had opened up for what we would call today the Bible, the Old Testament part of the Bible, and they had shared the Word of God with them. So they begged him, because he said he had other things to do, other places to go. They begged him to stay. And so he stayed and he went to that meal. And then they asked him to pray over the meal. And as he prayed and he broke bread, their eyes were opened and they realized that that was Jesus. This is a man that they'd been following for several years, probably at that point. They would say that they knew him. And here he had been with them on this journey to Emmaus all this time, and they didn't recognize that he was with them. I think sometimes in life, Jesus is with us. God the Father is with us. God the Holy Spirit is with us. And because we are looking at what we don't have, we don't recognize that he is present with us. Our hope for you this Advent season and our sincerest desire for you is that you would recognize that God is with you each and every day, every moment of your lives. He is present with you. Doesn't matter what you feel like. It doesn't matter what you see or what you don't see. He is always with you. He has promised that to us in his word. He will never leave you. He will always be with you. Father, we thank you for this day and for your loving kindness.